Hi, I'm Sherlock. Welcome to my new mystery case.
The November fog hung thick and yellow over Baker Street, transforming the familiar thoroughfare into a ghostly tableau where gas lamps flickered like distant beacons in an ocean of mist. The comfortable sitting room at 221B provided a welcome refuge from the oppressive gloom outside, where the fire crackled warmly in the hearth and cast dancing shadows across the familiar chaos of books, papers, and scientific apparatus that characterized our domestic arrangements. I had just returned from a particularly challenging surgery at St. Bartholomew's Hospital, my mind still occupied with the complexities of the procedure, when I found my friend Sherlock Holmes seated in his customary armchair, his long, lean frame draped in his mouse-coloured dressing gown, his keen grey eyes fixed upon some invisible point in the middle distance, with that peculiar intensity I had come to recognise as the harbinger of mental activity. "Ah, Watson," Holmes said without turning his head, though I was certain my entrance had been as quiet as possible. "Your footsteps upon the stairs inform me that Mrs. Henderson's operation proved successful, though more taxing than you initially anticipated. The slight favour you show your left leg suggests you stood in one position for nearly 3 hours, and the faint scent of carbolic acid mixed with something distinctly metallic indicates you encountered considerably more bleeding than your morning consultation had led you to expect." I paused in the act of removing my overcoat, no longer surprised by such demonstrations, yet still impressed by their uncanny accuracy. "Quite right, Holmes. Mrs. Henderson is recovering well, though the procedure proved far more complex than my initial diagnosis suggested. But how could you possibly know I had been operating rather than conducting routine consultations?" Holmes finally turned to regard me with those sharp, penetrating eyes that seemed capable of reading the very essence of a problem written in invisible ink. "Elementary, my dear fellow. You departed this morning carrying your surgical case, which you employ only when called to perform actual operations rather than routine examinations. The particular arrangement of your collar suggests you have recently removed surgical attire. There is a small spot of blood on your right cuff that escaped your usually meticulous attention to cleanliness after procedures, and your left hand bears the telltale indentation of surgical gloves worn for an extended period." I glanced down at my shirt cuff and indeed discovered the tiny crimson stain his remarkable powers of observation had detected. Before I could respond, however, the sharp rap of knuckles against our front door echoed through the flat, followed by Mrs. Hudson's measured tread upon the stairs. Holmes's eyes immediately brightened with that particular gleam that always accompanied the prospect of an interesting problem. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," our long-suffering landlady announced, opening the door to admit a gentleman whose agitated state was immediately apparent despite his obvious efforts to maintain composure. "Mr. Horace Pemberlin of the Albion Gazette, to see you on urgent business." The man who entered our sitting room was heavy-shouldered and florid-faced, wrapped in a thick Ulster coat that bore the damp of the evening fog. His hat trembled slightly in his hands, and his breathing carried the rapid, shallow quality of a man who has recently experienced a profound shock. He was perhaps 50 years of age, with the ink-stained fingers and slightly stooped posture that marked him as a man of the press, yet there was an authority in his bearing that spoke of ownership rather than mere employment. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes," he said, his voice carrying more volume than the intimate setting required. "I am Horace Pemberlin, proprietor of the Albion Gazette. We have experienced a most ghastly occurrence, sir, one that has left my entire staff in a state of absolute bewilderment. I was told that if any man in London could make sense of impossible circumstances, it would be you." Holmes inclined his head with that courteous attention he reserved for clients in genuine distress. "Pray be seated, Mr. Pemberlin." You have come directly from Fleet Street, I perceive, and in such haste that you have neglected your muffler despite the chill of the evening. The Gazette works late hours, I am aware, but it is unusual for the proprietor himself to keep such extended office hours. Watson, perhaps you would be so kind as to offer Mr. Pemberlin some brandy." While I attended to our visitor's immediate needs, Holmes settled back in his chair with that deceptive air of relaxation that I knew masked the most intense mental activity. "Now then, Mr. Pemberlin, pray tell us what has occurred to bring you to our door on such a disagreeable evening." Pemberlin accepted the brandy with the gratitude of a man rescued from the edge of collapse, and took a steadying draught before beginning his account. "Mr. Holmes, 3 hours ago, my chief editor, Mr. Crispin Vale, was discovered dead in his private office under circumstances that defy all rational explanation. The room was locked from the inside, the key still in the lock, the windows securely latched, yet the scene within—" He paused, his hands trembling slightly as he set down the glass. Mr. Vale was found slumped over his typewriter, apparently having collapsed while in the act of composition. But here is the detail that has reduced my compositors to trembling wrecks and sent Inspector Lestrade into fits of frustrated bewilderment. There was blood upon the typewriter keys, Mr. Holmes. Fresh blood, congealed in dark pools among the letters, yet Mr. Vale's body bore not a single wound from which such blood could have issued. Holmes's fingers formed that characteristic steeple beneath his chin, and I observed the subtle quickening of interest in his expression. "Most intriguing, Mr. Pemberlin, at what hour was Mr. Vale last seen alive, and by whom?" "He was last observed at 7 o'clock by Miss Lydia Rowan, his chief stenographer, who delivered the corrected proofs of tomorrow's leading article. She left him with a considerable pile of correspondence, and was instructed to send Mr. Felix Harrow, our political correspondent, to see him within 20 minutes. Mr. Harrow presented himself at 8:15, knocked upon the door, but received no answer. He reported hearing the typewriter still in operation, the familiar rattle and bell that indicates the completion of a line, and assumed Mr. Vale was too absorbed in his work to be interrupted. When the night foreman, Pike, attempted to obtain final approval for the morning edition at 25 minutes to 9 and received no response despite repeated knocking, they forced the door. "And the blood?" Holmes inquired with quiet intensity. "Was it determined to belong to Mr. Vale?" "That is perhaps the most bewildering aspect of this entire affair," Pemberlin replied, his voice dropping to nearly a whisper. "Dr. Abernathy, the police surgeon, conducted preliminary tests and declared with absolute certainty that the blood was not Mr. Vale's. Whose blood it might be and how it came to be deposited upon the typewriter in a room sealed from within are questions that have left even the most experienced investigators of Scotland Yard completely baffled." Holmes rose from his chair with that fluid grace that characterized his movements when a case had fully captured his attention. "Mr. Pemberlin, has Inspector Lestrade secured the scene?" "He has, sir, though he grumbled considerably about the inconvenience. The entire office has been cleared of staff, and 2 constables guard the door to Mr. Vale's room. Inspector Lestrade muttered something about consulting you himself, though his pride seemed to war with his practical necessities." "His pride rarely interferes with his ultimate good sense," Holmes observed, with the faintest suggestion of a smile. "Watson, your hat and coat, if you please. Mr. Pemberlin, we shall accompany you back to Fleet Street immediately. A locked-room mystery involving blood that belongs to neither victim nor murderer presents possibilities that I find absolutely irresistible." As we prepared to venture into the fog-shrouded streets, I could not suppress a familiar thrill of anticipation. The game, as Holmes would say, was afoot, and the peculiar circumstances surrounding the death of Crispin Vale promised to test even my friend's remarkable powers of deduction to their utmost limits. The image of blood upon typewriter keys belonging to some unknown person in a room sealed from within presented a puzzle that seemed to mock the very foundations of logical investigation. Yet I had seen Holmes unravel mysteries that appeared equally impossible, and I had no doubt that before many hours had passed, the truth would emerge from even this most perplexing of circumstances. The hansom cab that carried us through the fog-bound streets toward Fleet Street seemed to move through a world transformed, where familiar landmarks became ghostly suggestions, and the ordinary sounds of London traffic were muffled into an otherworldly symphony. Holmes sat in contemplative silence, his sharp profile occasionally illuminated by the passing glow of a street lamp, while Mr. Pemberley clutched his hat and stared into the swirling mist with the expression of a man who had witnessed something that challenged his fundamental understanding of the possible. As our destination drew near, I found myself wondering what fresh impossibilities awaited us in the locked room where Crispin Vale had met his mysterious end, and whose blood had marked the keys of his typewriter in that final, inexplicable message written in crimson upon ivory and steel. The offices of the Albion Gazette stood like a fortress of journalism against the fog-shrouded expanse of Fleet Street, its narrow four-story facade blackened by decades of London soot and the relentless march of industrial progress. Two constables flanked the main entrance, their brass buttons gleaming dully in the uncertain gaslight, while the familiar compact figure of Inspector Lestrade emerged from the shadows to greet us with that characteristic mixture of relief and wounded professional pride I had observed so often when Scotland Yard encountered mysteries that defied conventional investigation. "Mr. Holmes," Lestrade said, his ferret-like features bearing the strain of a long evening's frustration, "I confess this business has me thoroughly perplexed. In 23 years of police work, I have never encountered circumstances quite so contradictory to common sense." He nodded briefly to me before returning his attention to Holmes. "The scene remains exactly as we found it, though I warn you the sight is decidedly unsettling." Holmes acknowledged the inspector's greeting while his keen eyes surveyed the building's exterior with that methodical attention to detail that always preceded his most brilliant deductions. The distant rumble of printing presses provided a mechanical heartbeat to the establishment, while the lingering scents of ink, paper, and tobacco smoke permeated the very air around us. "Inspector, before we examine the scene itself, perhaps you would describe the exact sequence of events as your investigation has established them." Lestrade consulted his notebook with practiced efficiency. "At 25 minutes to 9 this evening, Thomas Pike, the night foreman, attempted to gain access to Mr. Vale's office for final approval of tomorrow's edition. When repeated knocking produced no response, Pike summoned Mr. Pemberley and two compositors as witnesses. They forced the door, which was locked from the inside with the key still in place. Mr. Vale was discovered slumped forward over his typewriter, apparently having died while in the act of composition. Mr. Pemberley led us through the narrow entrance hall past the main editorial floor, where a few late-working journalists glanced up nervously from their desks, and up a steep staircase to the second floor. The atmosphere carried that distinctive quality of a working newspaper, heavy with purpose and the weight of daily deadlines, now rendered eerily quiet by the evening's tragic events. We reached the door in question, where another constable stood guard over what had become the scene of an impossible crime. The door itself appeared entirely ordinary, constructed of solid oak with a simple brass lock, showing clear evidence of forced entry where Pike had been obliged to break the frame. Holmes examined the lock mechanism with his magnifying glass, paying particular attention to the keyhole and surrounding woodwork. The key was found in the locked position from the inside, Lestrade confirmed. Pike was forced to splinter the doorframe to gain access, as you can observe from the damaged wood around the latch. As we entered the office, the scene that greeted us would remain etched in my memory for years to come. Crispin Vale lay slumped forward over his desk, his head resting upon a pile of proofs, his arms dangling lifelessly. He was a man of perhaps 60, with white hair and a neatly trimmed beard, now stained faintly with ink. His spectacles had fallen beside him, and by all appearances he had simply collapsed while working. I conducted a swift medical assessment and found no visible wounds, no signs of violence or struggle, yet it was the typewriter that commanded our immediate attention. The sturdy black Remington bore the impossible evidence that had baffled Scotland Yard. Dark, viscous pools of blood had congealed among the ivory keys, particularly concentrated around the central letters, while a faint smear extended across the carriage return lever. The quantity was surprisingly copious, and the metallic scent hung unmistakably in the air. Holmes moved with feline grace around the scene, his eyes cataloguing every detail, with that comprehensive attention I had learned to recognize. He stooped to examine the door's splintered edges, lifting a fragment of red wax from the floor with his penknife blade. "Observe, Watson," he murmured, studying the typewriter keys through his lens. The blood droplets show rounded edges, indicating they fell rather than were smeared. Yet here, upon the R and T keys, we see lateral crescents suggesting contact after the principal deposit. He drew out the typewriter's platen and read the final line of text. "The Ministry's assurances cannot excuse the manifest death," he noted. An editorial, broken off mid-word. He pressed the carriage lightly, producing the familiar bell. With the presses running below, steady vibration would suffice to carry the carriage and ring the bell periodically, explaining why Mr. Harrow heard typing when no one was actually at the keys. Holmes turned, his attention to a small ring of rust marking the polished desk. "What stood upon this circle?" he inquired. "A bottle of gum for sticking slips," offered Pike from the doorway. "I removed it yesterday when it had dried to a cake." From the wastebasket, Holmes retrieved the corner of a torn envelope bearing the clear impression of a heraldic seal, a wyvern rampant with a bar sinister. He watched Pemberlin carefully as he examined it. "A correspondent with aristocratic pretensions, Mr. Pemberlin?" "I cannot say," the proprietor replied tersely. Mr. Vale maintained extensive correspondence. Holmes's examination of the deceased revealed no wounds, no staining, no signs of violence. The windows remained securely latched from within, their sills undisturbed by any external intrusion. "Inspector," Holmes announced, "I shall require Dr. Abernathy's complete medical report immediately. Meanwhile, maintain your guards and keep the staff available for questioning. This locked room presents three distinct impossibilities: the bell that rang without fingers, the blood that fell where there was no wound, and the wax that lay where there was no seal." His eyes gleamed with that particular intensity that marked the beginning of his greatest triumphs. "Our culprit is either extraordinarily meticulous or dangerously impatient, and the typewriter itself has revealed more than was intended." Holmes moved with deliberate precision around the confined space of Vale's office, his keen eyes cataloguing details that would escape ordinary observation. The gas sconce above the desk drew his particular attention, where the brass fitting showed minute traces of adhesive residue, as if something had been temporarily affixed and later removed. He knelt to examine the gap beneath the door, running his finger along the skirting board and bringing away a faint smear that he studied with evident interest before rubbing thoughtfully between finger and thumb. "Inspector Lestrade," Holmes said without interrupting his methodical examination, I shall require interviews with every individual who had occasion to approach this office between 7 and 9 this evening. Begin with Miss Rowan and Mr. Harrow, if you please, and ensure that Dr. Abernathy expedites his complete post-mortem examination. The precise nature and origin of this blood may prove the key to our entire investigation. While Lestrade departed to summon the requested witnesses, Holmes turned his attention to Vale's desk with renewed intensity. The leather desk pad bore several impressions, including a rectangular mark approximately 6 inches by 4 inches, where something heavy had recently rested. He lifted the scattered correspondence with careful precision, studying the impressions left beneath on the worn leather surface. Miss Lydia Rowan entered first, a young woman whose intelligent demeanour and steady composure spoke of long experience managing the pressures of newspaper deadlines. Her dark wool dress was impeccably maintained, and she carried herself with the quiet competence of one accustomed to handling difficult personalities and irregular hours. Holmes indicated a chair with grave courtesy. "Miss Rowan, pray describe your final interview with Mr. Vale this evening, omitting no detail, however trivial it may appear." She folded her gloved hands with practiced efficiency. "It was precisely 7 o'clock, Mr. Holmes. I delivered the corrected proofs of tomorrow's leading article, and Mr. Vale made 2 minor alterations to the text. He appeared in good spirits, though pressed for time as always near deadline. He instructed me to send Mr. Harrow to see him immediately. Did you observe anything unusual in the office during your visit?" Miss Rowan considered the question with evident care. "There was an opened letter upon his blotter bearing a distinctive seal, a dragon-like creature with what appeared to be a diagonal bar across its body. Mr. Vale seemed quite displeased by its contents. He thrust the letter into his desk drawer and remarked that it was nothing to concern the staff." Holmes's glance flickered toward Mr. Pemberley, whose expression remained carefully neutral. "You wore gloves during your visit, I observe?" "Indeed, sir. The evening was quite cold, and I had not removed them since arriving." When Holmes had examined her gloves and found them free of any suspicious staining, Miss Rowan was dismissed with instructions to remain available for further questioning. Mr. Felix Harrow followed immediately, and his entrance provided a marked contrast to his predecessor's composed efficiency. He was a tall, spare man with anxious eyes set too close together, and his right hand bore a fresh strip of sticking plaster across the knuckle that immediately drew Holmes's attention. "A newsroom hazard, Mr. Harrow?" Holmes inquired with that deceptive casualness that often preceded his most penetrating observations. "A paper cut, sir," Harrow replied, attempting a laugh that carried an unmistakable note of nervous tension. "This evening, at 6:30, while reviewing the proofs. Nothing serious, merely an inconvenience." "You presented yourself at Mr. Vale's door at 7:15, I understand?" "I did, sir. I knocked repeatedly but received no answer, though I could distinctly hear the typewriter in operation within, the familiar rattle and bell that indicates the completion of each line. I assumed Mr. Vale was too absorbed in his work to be interrupted and returned to my desk. When I attempted again at 8:05, the typing continued, so I thought it best to leave him undisturbed." Holmes studied Harrow with that penetrating intensity that seemed capable of reading thoughts written in invisible ink. "You would swear that keys were being actively struck?" "The bell and carriage return were quite distinct, sir. After 20 years in newspaper work, one becomes intimately familiar with such sounds." With a suddenness that made Harrow visibly start, Holmes grasped the man's injured hand and examined it under the gaslight. A faint, reddish shadow stained the web between thumb and forefinger, as if something had been hastily wiped away despite the apparent cleanliness of the bandage. You cleansed this wound with carbolic acid, Mr. Harrow? At the office dispensary, sir, Harrow stammered, his discomfort increasingly apparent. Pike maintains a small medical cabinet for the usual cuts and paste burns. I confess I have little tolerance for the sight of blood. When Harrow had been dismissed, Inspector Lestrade drew me aside with the satisfied expression of a man who believed the solution lay within easy reach. There's our culprit, Dr. Watson. Blood upon the keys, blood upon his hand, and he claims to have heard typing when the victim was already deceased. The staff remember a heated disagreement between him and Vale last week regarding a political column. Holmes, however, seemed absorbed in examining Vale's desk drawer, which yielded to his touch and revealed an orderly collection of correspondence, sealing wax, and office supplies. He leaned close to inhale delicately, like a hound following a scent. Gum, sealing wax, common office odours, he murmured, and something else, faint and metallic though not ink. Pike returned with the requested medical supplies, and Holmes's examination of the carbolic bottle confirmed recent use, while the bandage roll showed a brownish stain on its loose end. A single dressing taken since 7 o'clock, Holmes observed with satisfaction. Yet it was his return to the typewriter that provided the most intriguing development. Using a pencil to depress the R and T keys without disturbing the congealed blood, Holmes examined the graphite tip with his magnifying glass. Most illuminating, he said to himself, as if some crucial point had been settled in his mind. Holmes straightened suddenly, his entire bearing alert with that particular intensity that marked the approach of a significant breakthrough. Inspector, we shall require Mr. Vale's personal effects, particularly his watch, and Dr. Abernathy's estimate of the precise time of death. Additionally, I need a complete accounting of every individual who approached this door between 7 and 9 o'clock. The evidence against Harrow seems quite conclusive, Lestrade observed, with professional satisfaction. My dear Inspector, Holmes replied with that slight smile that invariably preceded his most startling revelations, the evidence suggests that someone wished us to reach precisely that conclusion. The blood that fell as drops and was then deliberately disturbed, the typewriter that proclaimed activity when none occurred, and the door that bears subtle signs of manipulation all point to a mind both methodical and dangerously clever. Our culprit has relied upon the newspaper's own mechanical heartbeat to provide an alibi of sound, and upon our natural tendency to accept the obvious explanation. As we prepared to depart Fleet Street, Holmes cast one final comprehensive glance around the office, his eyes moving with the systematic precision of a man cataloguing evidence for future synthesis. The impossible circumstances surrounding Crispin Vale's death had begun to yield their secrets to his remarkable powers of observation, yet I sensed that we had only begun to glimpse the true complexity of the web that had been woven around this most puzzling of crimes. Dr. Abernathy arrived within the quarter hour, a compact, efficient gentleman whose brisk manner and well-worn medical bag spoke of long experience with the varied forms of sudden death that London streets provided in abundance. He examined Vale's remains with practiced thoroughness, while Holmes observed every detail of the procedure with that intense concentration I had learned to associate with his most significant cases. "Natural causes, gentlemen," Dr. Abernathy announced after completing his preliminary examination. "Apoplexy, brought on by the strain of overwork and advancing years. The heart simply ceased to function, probably between 7:30 and 8 o'clock this evening. There are no external wounds, no signs of violence, and no indication of poisoning. Whatever blood you have discovered upon that typewriter did not issue from Mr. Vale's body." Holmes received this confirmation with evident satisfaction, though his expression suggested the information had merely confirmed suspicions already formed. "Doctor, you would stake your professional reputation upon the assertion that this blood originated from another source entirely? Without question, Mr. Holmes. The quantity alone exceeds anything that might result from a minor injury, and Mr. Vale's body shows no wound capable of producing such bleeding. Moreover, the coagulation patterns suggest the blood was deposited some time after Mr. Vale's death occurred. Inspector Lestrade stepped forward with the confident air of a man who believed the solution lay within easy grasp. Then we have our answer, gentlemen. Harrow's injured hand, his presence at the scene, his claim to have heard typing when the victim was already deceased. The evidence speaks for itself. Indeed it does, Inspector, Holmes replied with that slight smile that invariably preceded his most devastating observations, though perhaps not in the manner you suppose. Observe. He moved to the typewriter and carefully positioned the carriage at mid-stroke, ensuring the bell mechanism remained disengaged. Mr. Pike, would you be so kind as to signal the press room to commence their evening run? The message was dispatched, and within moments the familiar rumble of the great printing presses began to vibrate through the building's structure. As the mechanical thunder reached its full intensity, we watched in fascination as the typewriter's carriage began to creep slowly along its track. This building's vibration providing sufficient motion to advance the mechanism. After perhaps 30 seconds, the carriage reached its limit, and the bell chimed with that distinctive note that had convinced Harrow he was hearing active typing. "There, gentlemen, is your phantom typist," Holmes announced with evident satisfaction. The presses begin their run at 8 o'clock precisely, and their vibration would cause any typewriter with a disengaged carriage to produce the sounds Mr. Harrow described. Our victim died of natural causes while working alone, but someone discovered this fact and seized upon the opportunity to create an elaborate deception. Holmes returned his attention to the gas sconce above Vale's desk, where his magnifying glass revealed traces of adhesive that would have escaped ordinary observation. Something was temporarily affixed here, Watson, something that required careful positioning and subsequent removal. Combined with the rectangular impression upon the desk blotter and the fragment of sealing wax I discovered, we begin to see the outline of a methodical plan. Dr. Abernathy gathered his instruments with professional efficiency. "I shall provide a complete written report by morning, Mr. Holmes, though my preliminary findings will not change. Mr. Vale died of natural causes, and the blood upon the typewriter originated from another source entirely." As the medical examiner departed, Holmes knelt once more beside the desk to examine the skirting board where his keen eyes had detected a faint smear that might have been overlooked as ordinary office grime. Using his penknife, he carefully collected a minute sample and studied it with evident interest. "Most illuminating," he murmured, rising to his full height with that fluid grace that marked his movements when a case had fully engaged his faculties. "Inspector, I must caution you against precipitate action regarding Mr. Harrow. While the evidence appears to point in his direction with remarkable clarity, it is precisely this abundance of convenient proof that troubles me most profoundly." Lestrade's expression carried that mixture of frustration and grudging respect I had observed whenever Holmes's investigations challenged the conventional wisdom of Scotland Yard. "You suspect Harrow is innocent?" "I suspect, Inspector, that someone has taken considerable pains to ensure we would reach precisely the opposite conclusion. Consider the sequence of events. A man dies of natural causes while working alone in his locked office, yet someone manages to deposit blood that is not his upon the typewriter keys, create the illusion of continued activity after death, and focus our attention upon the impossibility of the circumstances rather than upon the true purpose of the deception." Holmes moved about the confined space with renewed purpose, his eyes cataloguing details that would escape ordinary observation. The wastebasket yielded additional fragments of correspondence, including a corner bearing the heraldic seal Miss Rowan had described. The desk drawer, when examined closely, carried faint traces of sealing wax and something else, metallic yet distinct from the usual office odours of ink and paste. "The beauty of this particular deception, Watson," Holmes observed as we prepared to conclude our examination, "lies in its reliance upon our natural tendency to focus upon the dramatic and impossible while overlooking the mundane and practical. Our culprit understood that a locked room mystery would command attention while the true purpose of the evening's activities proceeded unnoticed. As we gathered our coats and prepared to depart Fleet Street, Holmes cast one final comprehensive glance around Vale's office, his sharp features illuminated by the flickering gaslight. The impossible circumstances surrounding the editor's death had begun to yield their secrets to his remarkable powers of observation, yet I sensed that we had only begun to glimpse the true complexity of the web that had been woven around this most puzzling of crimes. "Inspector," Holmes said as we reached the stairway, "maintain your guard upon this room and ensure that no one disturbs the scene until we return tomorrow. Additionally, I shall require a complete list of everyone who entered this building between 7 and 9 o'clock this evening, including messengers, delivery boys, and any casual visitors. The solution to this mystery lies not in the blood upon the typewriter keys, but in understanding why someone wished us to believe it significant." The fog had thickened during our time within the newspaper offices, transforming Fleet Street into a ghostly thoroughfare where familiar landmarks became mere suggestions in the swirling mist. As our hansom carried us back toward Baker Street, Holmes sat in contemplative silence, his keen profile occasionally illuminated by the passing glow of street lamps, while his restless fingers drummed against his knee in that characteristic rhythm that indicated the most intense mental activity. The game, as he would say, was indeed afoot, and the peculiar circumstances surrounding Crispin Vale's death promised to test even his remarkable powers of deduction to their utmost limits. The comfortable warmth of our Baker Street sitting room provided a welcome refuge from the fog-shrouded streets, yet Holmes showed no inclination toward rest. The fire had burned to a thoughtful glow by the time he moved directly to his chemical apparatus, setting out his microscope and various reagents with that methodical precision I had learned to associate with his most significant investigations. The violin lay silent upon its chair, for when Holmes worked with such intensity, even his music retired into the shadows to await the verdict of his scientific analysis. "Watson," he said without looking up from his preparations, "observe the samples I collected from Vale's office with particular attention to their chemical composition, the fragment from the skirting board, the adhesive residue from the gas fitting, and this minute trace from the desk drawer all tell a story that Scotland Yard has entirely overlooked." I watched as Holmes prepared slides with the various specimens, adding drops of different solutions with practiced expertise. To the sample from the skirting board, he introduced a crystal of something yellow that sent a faint greenish tint through the solution, then held it to the lamp with narrowed eyes. The familiar acrid scent of his chemical work filled the room, mingling with the tobacco smoke from his abandoned pipe. "Most illuminating," he murmured, after several minutes of intense examination. "Fish glue, Watson, with the faintest trace of bituramate. Not the common gum Arabic one would expect in a newspaper office, nor ordinary paste. This is the province of the photo engraver rather than the compositor." The implications of this discovery began to take shape in my mind. "You believe the blood was somehow applied by mechanical means?" "Consider the evidence systematically," Holmes replied, moving to his desk where he began sketching the layout of Vale's office with remarkable accuracy. The adhesive residue upon the gas sconce positioned directly above the typewriter the rectangular impression upon the desk blotter suggesting something heavy had recently rested there, the fragment of sealing wax, and now this specialized adhesive used in photographic processes. Holmes's pen moved with swift precision as he illustrated his theory. Suppose a small apparatus, perhaps the dimensions of a photographic plate case, were temporarily affixed above the desk. A reservoir containing the prepared blood, fitted with a mechanism triggered by the building's vibration. When the printing presses commenced their evening run, the blood would descend precisely where shock and horror would direct our attention, while the phantom sounds of typing provided by the mechanical vibration would establish the illusion of continued life. The ingenuity of such a device was remarkable, yet it raised equally perplexing questions about motive and opportunity. Before I could voice these concerns, however, the sharp rap of knuckles against our door announced Inspector Lestrade's return. Mrs. Hudson admitted him with an expression that suggested his urgency had impressed even her considerable experience with late-night visitors. "Mr. Holmes," Lestrade announced with evident satisfaction, "we have discovered conclusive evidence against Felix Harrow." He placed a leather portfolio upon Holmes's desk with the triumph of a man who believed the case had reached its natural conclusion. A search of his desk revealed correspondence establishing both motive and opportunity. Harrow has been conducting a private investigation into financial irregularities at the Gazette, and Vale had apparently discovered his activities. Holmes examined the portfolio with careful attention, though his expression suggested the discovery had merely confirmed suspicions already formed. The correspondence revealed Harrow's systematic documentation of questionable accounting practices, including payments to political figures for favorable coverage and the diversion of advertising revenue through fictitious companies. "Most illuminating, Inspector," Holmes observed, though his tone carried that note of reservation I had learned to recognize as significant. Yet consider this curious detail. If Harrow wished to silence Vale permanently, why create such an elaborate deception? A simple case of apoplexy in a locked office would have attracted no particular attention from Scotland Yard. Lestrade's confidence appeared somewhat diminished by this observation. Perhaps he wished to cast suspicion elsewhere, or to create confusion about the circumstances. "Then why ensure that the evidence pointed so clearly toward himself?" Holmes replied, returning to his microscope with renewed intensity. "The blood upon his bandage, his presence at the scene, his claim to have heard typing when Vale was already deceased. Either Harrow is remarkably incompetent, or someone has taken considerable pains to ensure we would reach precisely this conclusion." After several moments of silent examination, Holmes straightened with that expression of quiet satisfaction that invariably preceded his most startling revelations. "Inspector, the blood sample I collected from the typewriter keys contains traces of glycerin and potassium nitrate, substances commonly employed in photographic processes. The microscopic examination reveals fibers consistent with prepared materials rather than natural human tissue." The implications of this discovery transformed Lestrade's expression from confidence to bewilderment. "You suggest the blood was artificially prepared?" "I suggest that someone possessed both the knowledge and materials necessary to create a convincing simulation, and that this deception was executed with considerable skill," Holmes replied, moving to the window where he stood, gazing into the fog-shrouded street. "The question that remains is whether this elaborate charade was designed specifically to incriminate Harrow or to distract our attention from some other purpose entirely." Holmes returned to his desk and completed his diagram of Vale's office, marking each significant detail with precise notation. "Consider the positioning of every element, Inspector. The typewriter placed to catch the building's vibration, the gas fitting positioned to support temporary apparatus, the desk arranged to create specific impressions upon the blotter. This was not the work of a moment, but a carefully orchestrated performance designed to achieve a specific result. The clock upon our mantelpiece chimed 11 as Holmes set aside his pen, and I observed that familiar gleam in his eyes that marked the approach of a solution to even the most perplexing mysteries. "Inspector, I must request 24 hours to complete my investigation. Meanwhile, maintain surveillance upon Mr. Harrow without placing him under formal arrest. The true culprit in this affair possesses both considerable intelligence and access to specialized materials." Holmes moved to his chemical table and began carefully storing his samples and apparatus. "Tomorrow we shall visit the College of Arms to identify the heraldic seal Miss Rowan described, and we shall examine the photographic engraving department of the Albion Gazette with particular attention to their recent activities. The blood upon the typewriter keys, the phantom sounds of typing, and the locked room mystery itself are merely components of a larger design, one that will become clear when we understand not what happened in Vale's office, but why someone wished us to believe it significant." As Lestrade departed with reluctant agreement to delay formal charges, Holmes settled into his armchair with that absorbed concentration that indicated the most intense mental activity. The impossible circumstances surrounding Crispin Vale's death had begun to yield their secrets to his remarkable powers of observation, yet I sensed that the most significant revelations lay ahead. Our culprit had demonstrated both theatrical flair and technical expertise, suggesting a mind capable of elaborate deception in service of motives we had yet to comprehend. The game, as Holmes would say, was indeed afoot, and tomorrow would bring us closer to the truth behind this most ingeniously constructed mystery. The morning light struggled through the perpetual veil of London's industrial haze as Holmes and I made our way toward Queen Victoria Street, where the College of Arms maintained its ancient repository of heraldic knowledge. Holmes had risen before dawn, and I discovered him already examining his chemical samples with renewed intensity, the familiar blue smoke of his strongest tobacco filling our sitting room like incense before an altar of deduction. "The heraldic seal described by Miss Rowan presents our most promising avenue of inquiry, Watson," Holmes observed as our hansom navigated the increasingly crowded streets. "A wyvern rampant with bar sinister suggests legitimacy tainted by scandal, precisely the combination that might motivate elaborate deception to preserve reputation." The College of Arms occupied an imposing Tudor structure whose stone facade bore the accumulated dignity of centuries. We were received by Sir Geoffrey Whitmore, an elderly herald whose pale eyes brightened with professional interest when Holmes produced his careful sketch of the distinctive seal. "A wyvern rampant with bar sinister," Sir Geoffrey mused, consulting a leather-bound volume with practised efficiency. "That would be the arms of the Ashford family, specifically the cadet branch established in the last century. The current head is Sir Reginald Ashford, a gentleman of considerable influence in political circles who has recently faced whispered accusations regarding his business practices." He paused, studying Holmes with evident curiosity. "His younger brother, Dr. Marcus Ashford, has distinguished himself in photographic chemistry before establishing a practice in Harley Street." The significance struck me immediately. A man with expertise in photographic chemistry, family connections requiring protection, and the technical knowledge to create elaborate deceptions presented precisely the combination Holmes had theorized. Our next destination proved equally revealing. At Fleet Street, Inspector Lestrade met us with the visitor ledger Hardy had preserved from the previous evening. Among the few entries, one stood out with startling clarity. At 6:50, a gas fitter named Jonas Clegg of the Metropolitan Gas Light Company had been admitted to examine a sconce upon the second floor. "No repair was ordered," Pike protested when summoned. "Our sconces have given no trouble whatsoever." Holmes examined the calling card with that peculiar stillness I had learned to respect. "Metropolitan Gas Light Company," he read softly. Whereas in London one deals with the Gas, Light and Coke Company, a provincial formula transplanted injudiciously. His eyes gleamed with satisfaction. You observed this man particularly, Hardy? A stocky fellow, clean-shaven, in corduroy jacket and moleskin trousers, with his tool roll under arm, he smelt of oil and a queer chemical tang besides. Bichromate, Holmes murmured to me. A nose accustomed to photographic chemicals would carry such traces. The photographic engraving department occupied the building's basement, where acrid scents and mechanical precision created an atmosphere distinctly removed from the literary endeavours above. Mr. Timothy Graves, the chief engraver, received us with cautious courtesy, his yellowed fingers testament to years of chemical work. Holmes's examination revealed extensive stocks of fish glue, bichromate solutions, and various compounds employed in photographic processes. More significantly, Graves confirmed that a gentleman matching Dr. Ashford's description had visited 3 days previously, ostensibly to discuss technical improvements. A most knowledgeable fellow, Graves observed. He examined our equipment with considerable interest, asking detailed questions about timing and the building's mechanical vibrations. He remained nearly 2 hours, showing particular interest in our evening schedules. Holmes discovered a portable bracket lamp, whose knurled thumbscrew was missing, then located the matching screw among waste materials in a carpenter's box. His expression remained unchanged, yet I observed the fragment vanish with conjurer-like dexterity. "Any apparatus recently out on loan?" Holmes inquired. Graves hesitated. "A small copying frame sent to the art department Tuesday. Returned this morning." He paused. "And 1 pot of fish glue missing from our locked stores, replaced from new stock." When we regained the editorial floor, Holmes requested a private interview with Mr. Pemberlin, whose anxiety was immediately apparent. Under Holmes's direct questioning, the proprietor's resistance crumbled. "Sir Reginald approached me 6 months ago regarding certain political coverage," Pemberlin admitted reluctantly. "The financial arrangement seemed reasonable until Vale began investigating the payments. When I mentioned this difficulty to Dr. Ashford 3 days ago, he seemed more interested in Vale's working habits and our building's evening operations than in providing technical advice." Holmes's expression carried that familiar gleam that invariably preceded his most dramatic revelations. "Mr. Pemberlin, you will maintain absolute discretion while we complete our investigation. Dr. Ashford has demonstrated both considerable ingenuity and dangerous determination." As we emerged onto Fleet Street, the pieces of this elaborate puzzle were falling into place with inexorable logic. Our adversary possessed technical expertise, family motivation, and detailed knowledge of the Gazette's operations. Yet the most significant confrontation lay ahead as we prepared to face a criminal whose scientific knowledge matched his ambition. That evening Holmes moved about our Baker Street sitting room with the restless energy of a mind approaching the culmination of complex calculations, his long fingers alternating between the chemical apparatus and his writing desk as he composed a series of carefully worded messages. The discoveries at the College of Arms and the Gazette's photographic department had transformed theoretical suspicion into methodical certainty. Yet Holmes approached the coming confrontation with that particular caution he reserved for adversaries whose intelligence matched their desperation. "Our quarry possesses both scientific training and considerable vanity, Watson," Holmes observed as he sealed 3 separate envelopes with practiced precision. "Such individuals, when cornered, often prove more dangerous than common criminals, for their educated minds can conceive solutions that desperation alone might never inspire. We must therefore employ both confidence and curiosity as our weapons." The first message went to Inspector Lestrade, instructing Scotland Yard to strengthen publicly the appearance of their case against Harrow, while privately circulating whispers that certain scientific anomalies had cast doubt upon the obvious interpretation. The second required Mr. Pemberlin to reduce the Gazette's evening staff to essential personnel only, keeping them confined to the ground floor after 10 o'clock. The third requested Miss Rowan to mention discreetly among the compositors that Mr. Vale's typewriter bore an unreadable impression of a final line which Holmes believed he could recover with proper illumination. "We shall provide our adversary with 2 powerful stimuli," Holmes explained, with evident satisfaction. Confidence that his misdirection has succeeded, combined with intellectual curiosity about what traces of his handiwork might yet be detected. A mind that constructs such elaborate theatrical performances cannot rest while a single prop remains upon the stage. By 9 o'clock we had arrived at the Carlton Club in Pall Mall, where Holmes had assumed his familiar disguise as an elderly club factotum, his shoulders bent with age and his upper lip adorned with melancholy whiskers that transformed his sharp features completely. The porter admitted us with that careless courtesy extended to the invisible class upon whose services such establishments depend, and within 20 minutes Holmes had gathered a comprehensive inventory of Sir Reginald Ashford's evening habits. "A creature of absolute routine," Holmes murmured as we departed into the fog-shrouded street. "Mutton at 7, claret too, freely poured thereafter, and correspondence delivered at 8 by a page whose hands bear ink stains rather than tobacco. The envelope matched our heraldic sketch precisely, Watson. Our politician receives but does not compose his family's messages, confirming his ignorance of his brother's methods." Our return to Fleet Street revealed that Inspector Lestrade had complied admirably with Holmes's instructions. 2 constables maintained their conspicuous guard at the main entrance, while the staircase to the second floor lay in shadowed silence. Holmes moved with feline precision through the darkened corridor, dusting the skirting board with a fine veil of ash and fixing a single horsehair across Vale's doorway at ankle height, securing it with saliva and breath. Within the office itself, Holmes adjusted the gas sconce above the desk with meticulous care, placing a small sheet of paper beneath it with a pinprick of gum at one corner. "Building vibration will shift this paper by a hair's breadth," he explained quietly. "Curiosity will shift it considerably more, and the disturbance will provide unmistakable evidence of unauthorized examination." We established our surveillance position in the gloomy recess near the copy room, where the steady pulse of the building's mechanical heart seemed to beat against our ribs. Midnight came and passed in patient silence, broken only by the distant sound of a messenger's footsteps that echoed and faded. Then, at 12:30 by my watch, the faintest whisper of leather and that distinctive chemical odor we had detected in the engraving department announced our quarry's arrival. Holmes's elbow touched mine with the lightest warning as a shadow detached itself from the stairway darkness and approached Vale's door with the delicate precision of a man whose intellect governed his every movement. The gloved hand hovered, withdrew, then returned to examine the lock mechanism. And in that crucial moment, the horsehair trembled and broke. A constable's cough from the street below sent the figure flattening against the wall before slipping away with such silence that I might have doubted my senses had Holmes not moved immediately to examine the evidence. "2 footprints only in the ash," he whispered. "Foreign manufacture, narrow waist, heel worn at the outer edge to correct slight pronation. The paper beneath the sconce has shifted fractionally, showing the hand drifted upward to test for adhesive residue." From the threshold, Holmes retrieved a minute strip of oiled linen, no wider than a bootlace, and smoothed on one side as if by long friction against other materials. The scrap carried unmistakable traces of bichromate and fish glue, confirming our adversary's identity with scientific precision. "A tool roll binding, Watson," Holmes observed with quiet satisfaction. "Our doctor maintains laboratory habits even in his criminal endeavours. We have demonstrated that Scotland Yard focuses upon Harrow, while rumours circulate of scientific anomalies. This combination of confidence and curiosity will draw him into the open tomorrow, for a proud artificer cannot resist confirming that his masterpiece defies ordinary detection." As we returned to Baker Street through the fog-shrouded streets, Holmes's expression carried that peculiar intensity I had learned to associate with approaching triumph. The psychological trap had been set with characteristic precision, and Dr. Marcus Ashford's own intellectual vanity would soon compel him to provide the final evidence necessary for his complete exposure. The morning brought with it a clarity of purpose that matched the gradual lifting of London's perpetual fog, and Holmes approached the day's work with that methodical precision I had learned to associate with his most dangerous quarries. Over breakfast, he outlined a strategy that combined direct investigation with psychological manipulation designed to force Dr. Marcus Ashford into a position where his guilt would become undeniable. "Our adversary believes himself secure in his elaborate deception, Watson," Holmes observed, buttering his toast with the same careful attention he devoted to his most complex cases. "He has created what he considers an insoluble mystery, directed suspicion toward an innocent man, and retrieved whatever correspondence threatened his brother's reputation. Yet his very thoroughness will prove his undoing, for a mind capable of such meticulous planning cannot rest easy while loose ends remain untied." Holmes dispatched a carefully worded message to Inspector Lestrade, instructing him to make a conspicuous show of strengthening the case against Harrow while allowing subtle hints to circulate regarding certain scientific anomalies that had been discovered at the scene. The psychological effect upon Dr. Ashford would be twofold: confidence that his misdirection had succeeded, combined with intellectual curiosity about what traces of his handiwork might have been detected. By mid-morning, we had arrived at the elegant Georgian facade of Dr. Ashford's Harley Street practice, where the brass nameplate gleamed with that particular cleanliness that spoke of meticulous attention to appearances. Holmes paused to examine the door frame with his magnifying glass, discovering minute traces of the same fish-glue adhesive he had identified at the Gazette offices. "Our quarry has been careless, Watson," he murmured with evident satisfaction. "The same specialized compounds employed in his photographic work have left their signature upon his own establishment." The waiting room carried the antiseptic atmosphere common to medical practices, yet my trained eye detected subtle anomalies that suggested Dr. Ashford's interests extended far beyond conventional medicine. The shelves bore an unusual collection of chemical treatises, while the air carried faint traces of bichromate and other photographic compounds. Behind a screen intended to provide privacy for patients, Holmes discovered a small laboratory fitted with equipment of remarkable sophistication. "Most illuminating," Holmes observed, lifting fragments of paper from a waste basket. The scraps bore traces of the distinctive heraldic seal we had identified at the College of Arms, along with what appeared to be practice attempts at reproducing the Waven rampant. "Our doctor has been perfecting his family's signature." Dr. Marcus Ashford entered with the confident bearing of a man accustomed to commanding respect, yet I observed the subtle tension in his shoulders that suggested awareness of our true purpose. He was perhaps 40 years of age, with the pale complexion and stained fingers that marked long hours with chemical processes. His greeting carried professional courtesy tinged with unmistakable wariness. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he said with studied calm, "I understand you are investigating the unfortunate circumstances surrounding Mr. Vale's death, a tragic loss to the journalistic profession." Holmes settled into the offered chair with that deceptive air of relaxation that masked his most intense mental activity. Indeed, Doctor, we have encountered several puzzling aspects that require clarification from someone with your particular expertise in photographic chemistry. The conversation proceeded with the careful precision of a chess match between masters, each move calculated to reveal information while concealing intention. Holmes presented his evidence with theatrical timing, the specialized adhesive compounds, the missing equipment from the Gazette's engraving department, the heraldic seal fragments, and most damning of all, the artificial blood whose chemical composition bore the unmistakable signature of photographic processes. Dr. Ashford's professional composure began to show hairline cracks under Holmes's relentless logic. His fingers drummed against the desk with unconscious rhythm, and the faint chemical stains beneath his nails seemed to darken under our scrutiny. When Holmes produced the fragment of sealing wax discovered in Vale's office, holding it to the light with dramatic precision, the color drained from our suspect's face. "This particular compound contains traces of your distinctive photographic chemicals, Doctor," Holmes observed with quiet satisfaction. "Most curious, considering it was found in a locked room where natural death had occurred." The psychological pressure proved decisive. Dr. Ashford rose from his chair with sudden agitation, his carefully maintained facade crumbling under the weight of inexorable evidence. "Mr. Holmes, I must protest these insinuations. My reputation in this community is beyond reproach." "As is your ingenuity," Holmes replied with that slight smile that invariably preceded his most complete triumphs. "The apparatus you constructed demonstrates remarkable technical sophistication. The timing mechanism triggered by building vibrations, the reservoir positioned above the gas sconce, the phantom sounds of typing created by mechanical resonance, a masterpiece of misdirection designed to focus attention upon impossibility while concealing the true purpose of your visit." Yet even as Holmes laid bare the elaborate deception, I observed that Dr. Ashford retained sufficient composure to attempt one final gambit. His eyes darted toward a cabinet containing what appeared to be additional chemical supplies, and his hand moved with subtle purpose toward a drawer that might contain further evidence of his activities. "You discovered Vale's natural death," Holmes continued with relentless precision, "and seized upon the opportunity to retrieve your brother's correspondence before it could expose the financial arrangements that threatened your family's reputation. The locked room mystery, the blood upon the typewriter, the evidence pointing toward Harrow were all components of an elaborate performance designed to distract Scotland Yard while you accomplished your true objective." Dr. Ashford's surrender was not complete, however, for his scientific mind had already begun calculating possibilities for escape or concealment of remaining evidence. As we prepared to summon Inspector Lestrade, I sensed that our adversary possessed sufficient intelligence and desperation to attempt one final dangerous maneuver before acknowledging defeat. The game, as Holmes would say, was approaching its climax, yet the most perilous moments often came when a cornered adversary realized that conventional surrender offered no acceptable alternative to ruin. The confrontation that would determine the ultimate resolution of this most ingenious deception was about to reach its decisive moment, and I prepared myself for whatever desperate measures Dr. Ashford might employ to preserve his elaborate charade or eliminate the witnesses to his exposure. The transformation in Dr. Ashford's demeanor was as sudden as it was complete, the veneer of professional composure cracking like thin ice beneath the weight of Holmes's inexorable logic. His pale complexion had taken on a waxy pallor, while his fingers drummed against the desk with that unconscious rhythm I had observed in desperate men who found themselves trapped between confession and catastrophe. The chemical scents that permeated his consulting room seemed to intensify, as if the very air had become charged with the electricity of impending confrontation. "Dr. Ashford, Holmes observed with that deceptive quietness that marked his most dangerous moments. "I perceive that you are contemplating some course of action that wisdom would counsel against. The evidence against you is already conclusive, and any attempt to compound your difficulties will serve only to transform a case of theft and misdirection into something far more grave." Yet even as Holmes spoke, Dr. Ashford's hand moved with sudden purpose toward a drawer whose brass fittings gleamed ominously in the gaslight. The contents revealed themselves as a collection of glass vials containing solutions whose acrid vapors immediately filled the room with the sharp bite of concentrated acids. His scientific training had provided him with weapons more subtle than mere violence, and his desperation had overcome whatever restraint his professional ethics might once have imposed. "Stand back, gentlemen," Dr. Ashford commanded, his voice carrying the brittle edge of a man who had abandoned all pretense of respectability. "This contains a concentrated solution of hydrochloric acid mixed with photographic compounds. One careless movement, and the results will prove most unpleasant for all concerned." Holmes remained perfectly still, though I observed his keen eyes cataloguing every detail of our surroundings with that comprehensive attention he brought to moments of extreme peril. The positioning of furniture, the distance to the door, the chemical apparatus behind the screen, all were assessed and filed away for potential use in the confrontation that was rapidly approaching its climax. "Your brother's reputation was indeed worth protecting," Holmes said with that conversational tone he often employed in moments of greatest danger, "though I suspect Sir Reginald remains unaware of the extraordinary measures you have taken on his behalf. The correspondence you retrieved from Vale's office contained evidence of payments that would have destroyed his political career and exposed the entire network of influence that has sustained your family's position in society." The mention of his brother's innocence struck its intended target, for Dr. Ashford's grip upon the chemical weapon wavered slightly as psychological complexity warred with desperate circumstance. "Reginald knew nothing of my methods," he admitted with bitter pride. "He believed the matter could be resolved through conventional channels, through legal pressure and financial inducement. He lacks the scientific imagination to understand that some problems require more sophisticated solutions." "Indeed," Holmes agreed, taking an almost imperceptible step closer to our adversary. "Your apparatus demonstrates remarkable ingenuity. The timing mechanism that responded to the building's vibration, the reservoir that delivered artificial blood at precisely the moment to create maximum confusion, the phantom sounds that established an alibi of continued life. The glycerin suspension was particularly challenging, I imagine, achieving the proper viscosity and coagulation characteristics while incorporating the potassium nitrate necessary to simulate human blood." Dr. Ashford's scientific vanity proved stronger than his caution, and I observed Holmes's strategy with growing admiration. By appealing to the man's professional pride, my friend was simultaneously gathering confession and creating psychological pressure that would ultimately prove decisive. "The bitramate traces were unavoidable," Dr. Ashford said with unconscious satisfaction. "The photographic processes required for creating convincing artificial blood inevitably leave chemical signatures, though I believed them too subtle for ordinary detection. Yet they connected your handiwork to the photographic engraving department," Holmes continued, now within striking distance of our quarry. "Combined with your impersonation of a gas company employee using provincial terminology, your practice attempts at reproducing your family's heraldic seal, and the specialized fish glue adhesive that mark both the crime scene and your own establishment, the evidence forms an unbreakable chain of proof." Holmes's comprehensive presentation of evidence struck Dr. Ashford like physical blows, each detail another nail in the coffin of his elaborate deception. "The testimony of Mr. Pemberlin confirms your unusual interest in Vale's schedule and the building's mechanical operations. The missing bracket lamp component was discovered in the Gazette's workshop. The fragments of correspondence bearing your family's seal were found in both Vale's wastebasket and your own refuse. Most significantly, the artificial blood upon the typewriter keys carries the precise chemical signature of your photographic compounds. The moment of decision had arrived. Dr. Ashford raised the bottle with desperate determination, yet Holmes moved with that lightning precision I had witnessed in our most perilous encounters. His left hand seized the doctor's wrist, while his right struck the chemical container with calculated force, sending it crashing harmlessly against the far wall, where its contents hissed and smoked upon the carpet. The struggle was brief but intense, for Dr. Ashford possessed the wiry strength of a man fighting for his freedom. Yet Holmes's superior technique and my immediate assistance proved decisive, and within moments our adversary was securely restrained, his breathing laboured and his face bearing the pallor of complete defeat. "The beauty of your plan, Doctor," Holmes observed as he straightened his coat with characteristic precision, lay in recognizing that Vale's natural death provided the perfect opportunity for misdirection. Rather than simply retrieving the compromising correspondence, you created an impossible mystery that would focus Scotland Yard's attention upon dramatic impossibility while your true purpose remained concealed. Dr. Ashford slumped against his desk, the brilliant mind that had conceived such an ingenious deception finally acknowledging the futility of further resistance. "It should have worked perfectly," he said with bitter frustration. Harrow's injured hand, his presence at the scene, his obvious motive for silencing Vale's investigation. The evidence was overwhelming. "Yet you underestimated the significance of trace evidence," Holmes replied with quiet satisfaction. "Your very precision in creating the deception provided the clues necessary to unravel it. The artificial blood betrayed you through its chemical composition, the specialized adhesives connected you to the scene, and your theatrical flair in creating phantom sounds revealed the methodical intelligence behind the entire performance." As Inspector Lestrade's whistle sounded in the street below, summoned by the message Holmes had dispatched before our confrontation began, I observed my friend's expression with growing curiosity. Something in his manner suggested that our investigation had not yet reached its ultimate conclusion. Inspector Lestrade will find Dr. Ashford most cooperative regarding the location of the documents he retrieved from Vale's office, Holmes said, with that slight smile that invariably preceded his most startling revelations. For a mind such as his cannot leave calculations incomplete, and the correspondence that motivated this entire elaborate performance remains hidden where only he can direct us to its recovery. Inspector Lestrade's arrival brought with it the familiar efficiency of Scotland Yard, his sharp features bearing that mixture of professional satisfaction and bewildered curiosity that always marked his encounters with Holmes's more theatrical revelations. 2 constables flanked him as he surveyed the scene. The shattered chemical apparatus, the acrid scent of spilled acids, and Dr. Ashford restrained between us with the resigned dignity of a man whose elaborate deception had finally collapsed under the weight of inexorable logic. "Mr. Holmes," Lestrade said with characteristic directness, "I confess this business has taken more turns than a Fleet Street alley. Are we to understand that Dr. Ashford is our culprit, not poor Harrow?" Holmes straightened his coat with that methodical precision that marked the conclusion of his most complex cases. "Indeed, Inspector, Dr. Ashford has demonstrated remarkable ingenuity in creating what appeared to be an impossible mystery, though his very brilliance has provided the evidence necessary for his conviction." The psychological pressure of complete exposure proved decisive in extracting Dr. Ashford's final cooperation. His scientific pride, even in defeat, compelled him to reveal the location of the documents that had motivated his elaborate performance. "Behind the anatomical chart in my laboratory," he said, With bitter resignation, stands a cabinet for photographic plates. The false panel is secured with a mechanism of my own design. Holmes's examination of the concealed compartment revealed not merely the correspondence that had threatened Sir Reginald's political career, but a comprehensive collection of documents exposing systematic corruption that extended from Fleet Street to the highest levels of government. The letters detailed payments to journalists, bribes to civil servants, and a network of influence that Vale's investigation would have destroyed completely. Most illuminating, Holmes observed, studying the evidence with evident satisfaction. Your brother's reputation was indeed worth protecting, Dr. Ashford, though your methods have achieved precisely the opposite result. These documents will now receive far more scrutiny than Vale's original editorial would have commanded. Inspector Lestrade gathered the correspondence with professional thoroughness, though his expression suggested the political ramifications would require delicate handling at the highest levels. This evidence necessitates a complete investigation, Mr. Holmes. The implications extend far beyond a single case of theft and misdirection. Our return to Fleet Street provided the opportunity to complete the restoration of justice that Holmes's investigation had made possible. Felix Harrow received the news of his vindication with profound relief, while Miss Rowan and the assembled staff listened with fascination as Holmes provided his comprehensive explanation of Dr. Ashford's elaborate deception. The beauty of this particular crime, Holmes observed, addressing the gathered witnesses with that professorial clarity he brought to his most complex revelations, lay in its recognition that Mr. Vale's natural death provided the perfect foundation for misdirection. Rather than simply retrieving the compromising correspondence, Dr. Ashford created an impossible mystery that would command Scotland Yard's complete attention while his true purpose remained concealed. Holmes moved about Vale's office as he spoke, indicating each element of the deception with precise gestures. Dr. Ashford visited these premises 3 days ago under the pretext of discussing technical improvements, but his true purpose was reconnaissance. He observed Mr. Vale's working habits, noted the timing of the printing presses, and calculated how the building's mechanical vibrations could serve his purposes. The explanation continued with methodical precision as Holmes detailed the evening's events. Disguised as a gas company employee, Dr. Ashford gained access to this office at 6:50, carrying apparatus of his own construction, using specialized fish glue obtained from your engraving department. He affixed a small reservoir above the desk, positioned to release artificial blood onto the typewriter keys when triggered by the building's vibration at 8 o'clock. Holmes demonstrated how the printing press's operation created sufficient tremor to advance the typewriter's carriage and ring its bell, producing the phantom sounds that had convinced Harrow of continued activity. The artificial blood, composed of glycerin and potassium nitrate to simulate human coagulation, descended precisely as the mechanical sounds began, creating the illusion of impossible circumstances while Mr. Vale lay naturally deceased. The evidence pointing toward Mr. Harrow was carefully orchestrated, Holmes continued, his keen eyes moving from face to face among his audience. The injured hand provided convenient explanation for blood traces, while the quarrel over editorial policy supplied apparent motive. Dr. Ashford relied upon our natural tendency to accept obvious solutions to dramatic mysteries. Mr. Pemberlin received the revelation with the gravity of a man recognizing how thoroughly he had been manipulated. The Gazette will publish the complete truth, he declared, with restored integrity. Mr. Vale's investigation shall see light, and justice shall be served. As we prepared to depart Fleet Street for the final time, Holmes cast one comprehensive glance around the office where natural death had been transformed into elaborate theatre. The impossible circumstances that had initially baffled Scotland Yard had yielded their secrets to systematic observation and logical analysis, proving once again that no mystery, however ingenious, could withstand the methodical application of scientific reasoning. The hansom that carried us back to Baker Street moved through streets where the fog had finally begun to lift, revealing familiar landmarks with renewed clarity. Holmes sat in contemplative silence, his sharp profile occasionally illuminated by gaslight, while his restless fingers drummed against his knee in that characteristic rhythm that indicated profound satisfaction with a case successfully concluded. "The true tragedy of this affair, Watson," he observed as we neared our destination, "lies not in the corruption it exposed, but in the intellectual brilliance wasted upon preserving a system already crumbling under its own contradictions. Dr. Ashford's scientific abilities, properly directed, might have contributed significantly to human knowledge." The comfortable warmth of our Baker Street sitting room provided welcome refuge from the evening's revelations, and Holmes moved immediately to his desk to complete the official record of our investigation. The fire crackled peacefully in the hearth, casting familiar shadows across the accumulated evidence of countless mysteries solved through the application of logic to seemingly impossible circumstances. "The case presents several points of theoretical interest," Holmes noted as he wrote with characteristic precision. "The use of mechanical vibration to create phantom evidence, the application of photographic chemistry to criminal deception, and the psychological manipulation of obvious clues to obscure true motives. Dr. Ashford's methods, however misguided, demonstrate considerable ingenuity." As the clock chimed midnight, marking the conclusion of this most elaborate deception, I reflected upon the remarkable chain of reasoning that had transformed an impossible locked room mystery into a comprehensible sequence of calculated fraud. The blood upon the typewriter keys, the phantom sounds of typing, the evidence pointing toward an innocent man, all had yielded their secrets to Holmes's remarkable powers of observation and inexorable logic. "Tomorrow," Holmes announced with quiet satisfaction, "Inspector Lestrade will discover that justice has been served, though the political ramifications of Dr. Ashford's retrieved correspondence will occupy Scotland Yard for months to come. The case of the blood upon the typewriter has reached its natural conclusion, Watson, proving once again that no deception, however ingenious, can long survive the systematic application of scientific method to criminal investigation." The game, as Holmes would say, was finally at an end, leaving behind only the satisfaction of truth revealed and justice restored through the patient unravelling of even the most impossible circumstances. The morning papers carried comprehensive accounts of Dr. Marcus Ashford's arrest, though the political implications of his retrieved correspondence would require weeks of careful investigation before their complete ramifications became clear. Holmes received the news with that quiet satisfaction he reserved for cases where justice had been served through the methodical application of scientific reasoning. Yet I observed a thoughtful quality in his manner that suggested the affair had provided insights extending beyond the immediate resolution of criminal activity. Inspector Lestrade arrived as we concluded our morning meal, his ferret-like features bearing the satisfaction of a man whose professional reputation had been enhanced by association with Holmes's remarkable deductions. The political correspondence recovered from Dr. Ashford's laboratory had indeed exposed systematic corruption extending from Fleet Street to the highest levels of government, necessitating investigations that would occupy Scotland Yard for months to come. "The magistrate was particularly impressed by your chemical analysis, Mr. Holmes," Lestrade reported with evident satisfaction. Dr. Ashford's confession was complete once he understood that the scientific evidence was irrefutable. He has agreed to testify regarding the full extent of the corruption network in exchange for consideration of his cooperation. The resolution of Felix Harrow's situation provided one of the case's more satisfactory conclusions. Cleared of all suspicion and vindicated in his investigation of the Gazette's financial irregularities, he had been promoted to chief editor with authority to restore the newspaper's editorial independence. Miss Rowan, whose careful observations had provided crucial evidence, received recognition for her professional competence and attention to detail. Mr. Pemberlin, his integrity restored after his momentary compromise born of fear, emerged with renewed commitment to journalistic principles. "The true fascination of this case, Watson," Holmes observed as Lestrade departed, his keen eyes reflecting that penetrating intelligence I had come to associate with his deepest insights, "lies not merely in its technical ingenuity, but in its demonstration of how intellectual brilliance can be perverted when placed in service of fundamentally corrupt purposes. Dr. Ashford possessed the scientific knowledge and methodical precision necessary for genuine achievement, yet chose to employ these gifts in preserving a system already crumbling under its own contradictions." The afternoon brought visitors whose gratitude provided its own satisfaction. Thomas Pike arrived with a delegation from the Gazette's staff, expressing appreciation for the restoration of their newspaper's integrity and the vindication of their colleagues' innocence. Their testimonials regarding Holmes's remarkable deductive abilities were received with characteristic grace, though I observed my friend's genuine pleasure in recognition from working professionals whose respect was earned through demonstrated competence. As evening approached and the familiar fog began its nightly descent upon Baker Street, transforming the bustling thoroughfare into the ghostly tableau we had encountered at the case's beginning, Holmes took up his violin and began one of those intricate improvisations that marked his most reflective moods. The music carried themes of complexity resolved into harmony, of deception yielding to truth, and of justice emerging from the patient application of reason to seemingly impossible circumstances. "It is a curious thing, Watson," Holmes remarked as he set aside his instrument, the boa resting against the strings with that delicate precision he brought to all his endeavours. "How often the most elaborate deceptions are undone not by grand oversight, but by the smallest, most seemingly insignificant detail. The fish glue, the specific chemical traces in the artificial blood, the very sound of the printing presses, each a thread seemingly inconsequential, yet forming an unbreakable cord when woven together by careful observation." Holmes moved to the window where the fog had thickened into that impenetrable veil that transformed London into a city of shadows and suggestion. Dr. Ashford's scientific training provided him with unique advantages in creating his elaborate deception, yet it was precisely this specialized knowledge that ultimately betrayed him. This keyed to chemical signatures of his photographic compounds, the mechanical precision of his timing apparatus, the methodical placement of false evidence, all bore the unmistakable marks of a trained scientific mind. The case had demonstrated once again that no mystery, however ingenious, could long survive the systematic application of logical analysis. The locked room that had initially baffled Scotland Yard, the blood upon the typewriter keys, the phantom sounds of typing, all had yielded their secrets to methodical observation and scientific reasoning. Dr. Ashford's theatrical genius had created a masterpiece of misdirection, yet his very precision in constructing false evidence had provided the clues necessary for its exposure. "The public craves the dramatic, the impossible, the miraculous solution," Holmes continued, his profile sharp against the gaslight as he gazed into the swirling mist. "They would rather believe in supernatural agency than in the meticulous application of scientific principles, yet it is precisely this preference for sensation over systematic investigation that allows such deceptions to flourish." As the clock chimed the evening hour and the comfortable warmth of our Baker Street refuge settled around us like a familiar embrace, Holmes returned to his armchair with that contemplative air that marked the conclusion of his most intellectually challenging investigations. The fire crackled peacefully in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the accumulated evidence of countless mysteries solved through the patient pursuit of truth. "The blood upon the typewriter keys told its own story, Watson," Holmes observed with quiet satisfaction. Though not the story Dr. Ashford intended. His very precision in creating artificial evidence provided the clues necessary to expose his deception, proving once again that truth possesses an inherent consistency that no amount of theatrical misdirection can permanently obscure. The case had reached its natural conclusion, leaving behind not merely the satisfaction of justice served, but the deeper understanding that intellectual gifts carry with them the responsibility for their proper application. Dr. Ashford's scientific abilities, perverted in service of corruption, had ultimately served to expose the very system he sought to preserve, demonstrating that no deception, however ingenious, could withstand the methodical pursuit of truth through logical investigation. "The game, as they say, is never truly over, merely adjourned," Holmes murmured, his eyes already showing that familiar gleam that suggested his restless mind was turning toward future puzzles. Humanity's capacity for deception is as boundless as its capacity for truth, and so long as there are those who seek to obscure the former, there will be work for those who pursue the latter. With that philosophical observation, Holmes settled deeper into his chair, his long fingers forming that characteristic steeple beneath his chin. The fog continued its silent advance past our window, muffling the distant sounds of London streets, yet I knew that before long another perplexing crime would shatter the peace of our sitting room. Once again, I would find myself chronicling the extraordinary deductions of my remarkable friend, bearing witness to that unique genius which could penetrate the darkest mysteries through the unwavering application of reason, observation, and scientific method. The case of the blood upon the typewriter had ended, but the great game of detection would continue, as endless and fascinating as the criminal ingenuity it sought to unravel.